Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our first formal lecture of the course, Week 1, Lecture 1. And in this lecture, we're going to survey, or at least begin to survey, some of the key terms and concepts in the study of comparative politics, so as to help you engage on this wonderful journey into studying various political systems and political ideas in an international context. And I would urge you to take copious notes and to also review the lecture notes that I have given you as part of the course. Okay, let's get started. What is at the heart of comparative politics? Most scholars would suggest, and I think it's accurate, is the idea of power. It's the ability to get someone else to do something they would not otherwise do. To get someone else to do something they would not otherwise do, or more formally, the ability of one actor to get other actors to do things they would not otherwise do. So it can be one country trying to influence another country, which we call bilateral, one country relating to one other single country, or multilateral, one country or multiple countries relating to multiple other countries. Well, what do we mean by power in comparative politics? Really, we're talking about three major ideas. The first idea is a reward. If one country does something that another country would like for it to do, the other country will reward that country. A second idea is the notion that a country doesn't do what another country wants or what other country would like for it to do, is the idea of sanctions, a way of punishing or hurting or trying to convince that other country to follow what another country wants. A third way of using power is the power of persuasion. And in many ways, this is the most valuable. Without going to war, without engaging in dramatic action, one country can influence another country's actions. Well, in a world system like the one in which we live now and the one in which you will be living in the future, the importance of influencing other countries for many, many reasons, or responding to other countries, is very important. It may be so important as to provide safety and security and economic benefit, social, political benefit for a particular country. Think of some examples that we could draw from recent occurrences. Most of the world's oil passes through a small piece of water called the Strait of Hormuz by Iran and by other Gulf states that goes out, leaves the Strait of Hormuz and goes to the rest of the world. Iran over time has threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz and make it more difficult for ships to follow through. Given that the world is dependent on Middle Eastern oil in large part, and because many of those countries that depend on oil are allies and friends of the United States, sometimes we respond to that threat with our own threat, our own, potentially we could respond to it with our own reward, our own sanction, or our own persuasion. And we try to do all of this from time to time in international politics and international affairs. Another example might be our ongoing disputes with China, second largest economy in the world, but China engages in tremendous copyright infringement and basic use, sometimes stealing of American intellectual property. So anytime there's a great computer program that is created in the United States, it may be copied by the Chinese and sold at a cheaper price, benefiting China, hurting U.S. industry. So we might engage in certain activities that will make it more difficult for China to do that. The United States is the most powerful country in the world. And by powerful, we mean it has the greatest capacity to influence other countries, but it is not unlimited, so keep that in mind. Okay, second topic of today. This is a course in comparative politics. What is politics? There are many disputes about the nature of politics. We're going to make one important distinction at the beginning of this class. We're going to talk about two ideas, politics and government. They're used synonymously, but they are not the same. Politics is the process of decision making. The process in comparative politics of how decisions are made, countries are influenced, and many other things, how the process of the use of power takes place. Government, on the other hand, is a definition of the institutions in those countries where politics takes place. For example, on an international scale, the United Nations would be an example of a government. In the United States government, centered in Washington, D.C., would be an example of a government. So we're going to keep making the distinctions between the institutions, government, and the process of decision making called politics. So that is a distinction what we will keep making, and is really very, very important to this course. We want to talk about some other definitions of politics as well. And these are more in terms of how to explain others' views of politics. One of those, by a famous American political scientist by the name of Harold Lasswell, was who gets what, when, and how. That's what politics is. And so that's who gets what, when, and how. Well, that may not explain a great deal, but it does explain the process of how power is used. And that politics is a study of the influence of how power is used and who ends up receiving the benefit, who ends up forcing the decision, who ends up persuading others to take action, other countries that is. Another political scientist by the name of David Eason has described politics as the authoritative allocation of values. That some organizations influence others, some countries influence others, and it's that definitive explanation that and the ability to make others make decisions is what's key. There are many other processes that are part of politics that we'll be talking about. There are also moral considerations that some countries in comparative politics either do not have any kind of moral framework, no guide for making their decisions, and make decisions based on different influences, different purposes. Others have a moral guide. For example, President Carter in the United States decided in the 1970s, late 1970s, that we should not, as a country, kill other heads of state, even if it might benefit U.S. policy, U.S. objectives in a country. So make a moral decision that dictates our understanding of politics. Another example would be countries who look at refugee situations in different ways. By that, we mean in cases of where there are refugee situations, other countries, some will allow refugees into their country with great ease, others are more restrictive. For example, Germany and Northern European countries have on occasion let significant numbers of immigrants into their country for a variety of reasons. The United States policy related to refugees, political and otherwise, has sometimes allowed large numbers to come into the country, especially in the late 19th century, early 20th century. Other times they're more restrictive. Okay, so we've talked about some of the larger framework issues. Let's talk about what it means to think politically. It's very important to think about how politics is pondered, how people make decisions, how people come to study politics and government, and how is that done. There are basically two approaches to politics. The first is what we call the empirical approach. It is the majority approach in political science in the 21st century. We call it the scientific method. It uses the scientific method, facts, data, evidence to determine what the ultimate truth is, what ultimate policy should be. Very often government will focus its attention, or groups of countries will focus their attention on making the best empirical decision. It has also become a cliche in American society, American life. Oh, I'll just go where the data leads me. We say that often in higher ed. Oftentimes it's not true, but it makes us feel better to say that. And all data is not the same. All statistics aren't the same. As a famous old cynical political scientist once said, as really a criticism of the empirical approach to politics, is that statistics do not lie, but statisticians sure do. Ponder that for a moment. Okay, that's the empirical approach. It is the most recent, the youngest approach to studying comparative politics. An example or examples of the empirical approach would be Machiavelli, the great Florentine, the Italian political thinker, who said, gather the data, make the best decision, and act, even if it's most dramatic. The older and more classical, probably the original empirical political scientist. And let me just say, if James Brown is the godfather of soul, Aristotle is the godfather of empirical political science. His book, The Politics, one of the great classics of all study of politics, surveyed in the ancient world 158 constitutions among the city-states, the small countries throughout the Mediterranean, and he took the best ideas, the ideas that worked from those 158 constitutions. So he took an empirical approach, an analytical approach, collected his data, and made the best recommendation. Now, the other school of politics is older than the normative approach. It is the minority view in the 21st century, but still has tremendous merit, and we call that approach the normative approach. Normative looks at the big ideas that undergird political systems and governments, and look how these ideas form and how these ideas undergird political systems. And that's very important to take a look at and to understand. So we'll be looking at both the big ideas approach, the normative, and the data-driven, pure analytical approach called the empirical. We'll be trying to put the best of those together to aid our study of comparative politics this semester. Thank you.